This gospel reading is a direct continuation from last week. So last week was all about doing good and extending a sign of peace in spite of our human tendency to get even or seek revenge from those who wrong us. The Good Samaritan is the logical conclusion to that idea. As I'm sure many of you have heard in the past when this reading came up before, Jews and Samaritans hated each other. To a Jew of this era, a Samaritan was a heretic and a half-breed, and Samaritans had equally disrespectful things to say to the Jews. Their animosity toward one another had been just building up and up and up over the decades. So Jesus, in his own manner of storytelling, essentially asks the question, what would you do if your worst enemy was beaten halfway to death on the side of the road? And oh yeah, it's in a dangerous neighborhood, so if you even stop to look at the guy, you're putting yourself at risk. The first two people in that story do not help him. They pass by, in spite of their clerical status. So it's like, hey, what are we paying you for? But then the Samaritan comes. You know, the beaten man's worst enemy, and he doesn't owe him anything. And what does the Good Samaritan do? He gets down, moved with compassion. He gives him first aid, and then carries him to a safe place where he can further recover. This is nothing less than righteousness. And he does it purely out of the goodness of his heart and out of disregard for who is a bad person according to his culture. Truly, to imitate the Good Samaritan is to be well on our way to imitating Jesus Christ. Last week I emphasized the need for us to imitate Christ in spite of how badly others might treat us, or how often they might spread lies about us to damage our reputation or mock our faith. I can talk about that for a whole lot longer than 8 minutes, believe me. The Good Samaritan is the feel-good story that illustrates the end of this kind of thinking. If only we can do good when and where we can, we honor Christ and we live in the Holy Spirit. And that is so much easier when we give up the silly idea that we have enemies to punish. We don't have enemies to punish. We have people to serve. And some of them have been beaten half to death at the side of the road, and they've been abandoned by people they once considered friends and role models. Let's be sure to step up in such moments. They happen more often than you might think. And I can't emphasize enough, this really is a good goal to have in life in general, to do your best in spite of who may or may not be your enemy. Because the uncomfortable truth is this: you're always going to have enemies. People are always going to speak badly of you. Some people will do everything they can to twist your words and actions into the worst possible context. And you're not able to control that. As a priest, for every time I'm judged for a bad decision, something I'm actually guilty of, for every time that happens, I'm complained at a dozen times over for things that are completely out of my control. And the most frustrating part is when I'm being yelled at by someone for something another priest said or did, when I in fact take the opposite stance. So I'm in complete agreement with my accuser, but I'm still wrong. I am very confident that many of you have similar stories from your workplace. This is infuriating. This is a part of life that no one likes. And this is what I think of with respect to that a modern rendition of that Jew-Samaritan rivalry. Some people are just at odds with other people on general principle. What are we supposed to do in those situations? Well, for someone without Christ in their life, I feel like the typical advice is hurt them as much as they hurt you. Push back and let them know that they can't walk all over you. That sounds like fairly mainstream advice to me. But for us, we're called to be better than that. As a matter of fact, we need to be better than that. And we need to be the Good Samaritan. Let people say what they want about you. You can't really stop that. It's not very likely that someone's going to call you a heretic and a half-breed, but people can, and probably will at some point, accuse you of being backward, stubborn, old-fashioned, anti-freedom, superstitious, anti-science bigots who come to church because you need someone to tell you how to live your lives because you're too cowardly to figure it out on your own. I was in college the first time I had all of those in the same accusation. When they say that about you, let them talk. Talk is cheap, and people's memories are very short these days. Instead, let your actions and words speak on your behalf. That is how people will actually remember you. Not the gossip they heard about you, but what you actually did in their presence. That's the real you. And I'll tell you this right now. I have gotten to know a good chunk of you in the last 4 years. You are not anti-science bigots. None of you. Not one. Thinking about it, I can't think of a single authentically practicing Catholic that I would dare call a bigot. Those two things don't mix. When I meet bigots, and I do, they're Catholic in name only. They're Catholic on paper, but they're the sort of people that are not likely to act as the Good Samaritan. They don't imitate Christ. Be the Good Samaritan. Be the kind of people who will stop and give aid to those on the side of the road. Be the kind of people who will stop and help when no one else will. Because that is perhaps the purest expression of your love of God and love of neighbor, and it doesn't require anything special. Your head, your heart, and your 2 arms.